What does emerge when the mask falls? I don't think I'm alone when I say the moment I realized I might be autistic was life-changing. And how this happened is different for everyone. But for me, the question started in the summer of 2022 while traveling through Twin Falls, Idaho. That morning seemed harmless from the outside. We woke up, grabbed coffee, and visited the local hot springs. It was while trying to decompress that the alarms started going off. I tried to suppress it. Just get in the van and drive. We'll get lunch in the next town, I told myself. But that wasn't enough. 30 minutes later, while sitting at a gas station, everything came crashing down. A meltdown. It felt like a profound explosion of chaos, a total flattening of all my systems, pure sensory whiteout. I was simply trying to order lunch over the phone when something snapped and I lost it. What looked like rage poured out of me. Tears streamed down my face. It was a collision between my frayed nervous system and the facts of reality. When my husband tried to help me, I couldn't speak. I couldn't function. I collapsed across the steering wheel, barely breathing. I was malfunctioning. My brain was literally on fire and had been for longer than I could have imagined. That day, something profound happened. I heard a voice. It said, "You need to look up late diagnosed autism in women." Not only was I stunned to hear a voice, I was even more surprised at the statement. It repeated itself. The next 2 days of driving were accompanied by endless YouTube videos, podcasts, interviews on the newly emerging subject of late diagnosed autism in women. It would take another year before I could find a way to address this question in a more meaningful way. In terms of my own life, as we all know, life keeps going. This also provoked issues. Who I'd always been wasn't working anymore. Not to mention, I was becoming more and more disabled by long COVID. I needed a way out, so once again, I was prompted by my unconscious to return to school. When I entered the individualized master's program at Antioch University, I was seeking a container, a place to process and integrate what had happened over the last few years. I needed a way to figure out who I was now. It didn't even dawn on me that my focus would become research into late diagnosed autism in women because I didn't know I was one. It was easier to pursue my interests in Jungian psychology, the study of consciousness, spirituality, creativity. These are things I've always been drawn to. But there was also the aspect of chronic illness, something I faced my entire life. And even though I am intelligent, I've continuously struggled to meet societal demands. The greatest loss was my career as an artist in 2015 due to burnout. What I now understand was the culmination of years of overperformance and adrenal fatigue. I didn't understand why it felt so traumatic until my own late diagnosis. Even now, I still wrestle with the complex nature of masking. How could I have masked for over 40 years without knowing it? And yet, when I look back, I can see it in every facet of my life. I still face it every day as I navigate the fallout. Unmasking is not just a psychological endeavor. It is the process of reorganizing the nervous system after countless cycles of depression, anxiety, and even suicidal ideation that can come with neurodivergent suppression. It is also the process of making conscious what has laid dormant within the unconscious. In my first research class, I was asked a simple question. What do you really want to know more about? That voice returned, this time clearly reminding me what was at stake. What followed was a deep dive into research, history, diagnostic bias, and my own unconscious patterns of masking. This became the subject of my master's degree. And at the same time, I began a 9-month certification in dream tending, a contemporary practice that draws from Jungian and post-Jungian psychology while honoring indigenous ways of knowing. I didn't yet understand how dreams would integrate with academic research. I only knew that they were essential. Once I began reading, listening, and studying the stories of other women, particularly those diagnosed later in life, this mirrored my own, down to the patterns of perfectionism and bullying experienced in childhood. Over the next 2 years, dreams became a harmonizing force, connecting me to my intuition while I entered the academic world of theory and data. It also served as the informative lifeline to my unconscious. As I explored the history of autism, the exclusion of women from diagnostic criteria, and the emerging recognition of distinct female presentations, I saw my own experience in the data. I was finally part of a we, and yet I still didn't know anyone else with my experience. As I began to integrate the realization that I could be autistic, I was struck by waves of grief and heartbreak, confronted by a century of misdiagnosis and institutional harm. Masking from an early age was not only expected but required for the sake of survival for those who went undiagnosed. Research also confirmed autistic women are frequently misdiagnosed, overmedicated, and dismissed. Over time, masking becomes a chronic stressor, contributing to nervous system dysregulation, autoimmune conditions, chronic pain, depression, and elevated risks of suicide. I could relate to all of this. But learning about this also forced me to see my childhood through a new lens. My struggle to fit in, the bullying, self-harm, difficulties at school, not to mention early signs of depression and anxiety, all pointed to an undiagnosed experience. I also had meltdowns, which felt like poison in my bloodstream, something that could only be released through a sudden physical act. From the outside, this appeared as uncontrollable rage or a destructive tendency. I was labeled as having ODD and diagnosed as dysthymic at 16. Medications were prescribed but often left me feeling numb or disassociated. What I really felt was overwhelmed and unsafe in the world, unable to meet the constant expectations from school and family. This caused me to build up a protective layer of defense inside myself, also known as continual state of fight or flight. Once I was an adult, my performance in the area of creating art became my mask. I learned in order to belong or be loved, I needed to prove myself. From the outside, I looked very successful. For more than 15 years, I ran on adrenaline, climbing the ladder of success as an artist until the strategies that once allowed me to function began to fail. Inside, I was holding on for dear life. This is when my original masks began to crack and the dysregulation became too much. The mask did not fall because I chose authenticity. I thought I was living my truth. I was an artist, for God's sake. But I used my gifts to prove I was worthy of acceptance and love. After my burnout in 2015, I was never the same. It would take another 5 years of struggling with countless symptoms before I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, heavy metal poisoning, mold toxicity, parasites, chronic pain, and then once the pandemic came, add long COVID to the list. By the time the voice spoke in Twin Falls, Idaho, I'd already been at war for most of my life. Being late diagnosed autistic at the age of 47 brought vital information to a lifelong mystery of illness and psychological pain. We take for granted the infinite variables that play a role in how a person perceives and experiences the world. Unmasking is not a process that can simply be achieved through therapy, a series of workbook questions, or willpower alone. It is a physiological and psychic reorganization, a recrafting of self-perceptions, introception, a reassessment of the world, extroception, and recalibration of one's nervous system, an absolute necessity since research concludes continuing to mask has too great a cost to long-term mental and physical health. This is what led me to dreams, art, and memoir as a means to unmasking. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask one wears to meet the world. He believed the true self could only emerge through individuation, a process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness. Jung understood dreams not as metaphors, but as living language of the unconscious, symbolic myth that is profoundly personal. Jung also observed that children are extremely sensitive to parental expectations and psychic environments. For the girls who are autistic and undiagnosed, the drive to belong often leads to early and unconscious masking, strategies that later become invisible even to the woman herself. Dreams offer access to what has been buried. Dreams are approached not as static images, but as living by engaging them through dialogue, imagination, art, breath, and movement. Forgotten aspects of the self are invited back into the body. What has been split off for survival can begin to return. As I began working consistently with my dreams, something profound occurred. I was guided back toward a way of knowing myself that I had lost. Over time, I returned to making art. Depression softened, my body began to respond differently to care. Dreams revealed beliefs that no longer served me, as well as showed me practical ways of living in greater attunement. In January of 2024, I received a formal autism diagnosis. My ADHD diagnosis would come the following year. By mid-2024, I completed my dream tending certification. I recorded over 180 dreams and wrote more than 400 pages of lived experience. Through this process, questions of identity, gender, embodiment, relationship, illness, and belonging emerged. Dreams revealed where I had learned to override my needs, where I had absorbed expectations that were never mine. Layer by layer, masks surfaced, and with each one, curiosity returned. This work also required narrowing my world. Isolation was not avoidance, it was containment. My system needed fewer inputs to reorganize itself. To understand the deeper lineage of dream healing, I turned to ancient traditions. Greek healing temples dedicated to dreams were once central to medicine. Remedies arose from the dream itself, with the physician acting only as a steward, where modern medicine has removed the dream from the process, privileging the physician's diagnosis over the patient's inner knowing. Autism research has followed a similar path, focused largely on observable behavior. Dreams offer something different, direct guidance from within. In my own work, dreams repeatedly pointed me toward treatments later supported by medical research, including hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which has become a cornerstone of my healing. Pilgrimage also became a part of this process. Traveling to Jung's home in Switzerland, later to Egypt and Crete, revealed how profoundly group dynamics and collective psyche impact my nervous system. Spending time in solitude and nature allows me to downregulate. I also learned viscerally how quickly masks reform in groups and how essential boundaries are for my well-being. Memoir writing became the final integrating thread. I revisited childhood memories, relationships, health struggles, and identity with new understanding. Writing by hand in different environments and through automatic and poetic forms allowed buried material to resurface. The act of telling the truth, slowly, relationally, became its own form of unmasking. Using dreams, art, and memoir as methods of inquiry is not merely personal, it is methodological. What I learned is this: the difference in how I experience the world is not incidental to my story. It is the story. What emerges when the mask falls is not immediate clarity or freedom. Instead, it is often collapse, grief, reorientation, a body relearning safety, a psyche reclaiming its voice. This is not failure. It is the threshold of self-discovery and healing. Thank you for joining me. I'm Sophia Sunshine, and this is the Neurovisionary Podcast.